I apologize. This guy looks like his head's about ready to explode, so we need to let him talk.
Governor, I saw your interview with Megyn Kelly, and there was one question that she asked you about Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yep.
Or
Iraq.
Iraq, I'm sorry. And you asked, or you said, I think it was yesterday, that I don't want to answer hypotheticals. Don't you think running for president is hypothetical when you say, if I run for president, ...
Rewriting history is hypothetical. What she said was, knowing what we know now, what would you have done? I heard whatever I heard, it was translated, knowing what you knew then, what would you do? And I answered it honestly, and I answered it the way I will answer all the time, which is that there were mistakes made, but based on the information that we had, it was the right decision, the same decision that people on the left and right agreed with.
Well, that was former Florida Governor Jeb Bush and an astute Kelly File viewer at a town hall-style event in Reno, Nevada earlier today. The governor still dealing with questions on Iraq after our interview earlier this week. He says he misheard our question on Iraq, and he's been trying to set the record straight ever since, while also defending his brother, the former president. Earlier, I spoke with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul about that and much more. Senator, good to see you tonight. And so let's just start quickly with the question that I asked him. And I think for you it'll be relatively easy given your earlier positions. But knowing what we know now, would you have authorized the invasion into Iraq?
No, I think the invasion of Iraq was a mistake, and I thought it was a mistake even at the time. And I think it's a mistake for a reason that I think is consistent with a lot of other things that have gone wrong in the Middle East. I think when we've toppled secular strongmen, secular dictators, we've gotten chaos and the rise of radical Islam. So you have Iraq now that's almost like a vassal state for Iran. You have Iranian troops in Iraq. Iran is much stronger now with Hussein gone. So I think really the objective evidence on the ground shows that toppling Hussein made us less safe as a country. But also the same applies to Hillary's war in Libya. Toppling Gaddafi made us less safe.
Even the president has acknowledged some ownership on that one. And John Bolton has made a similar point to the one you're making, which is the United States may have been better off with some of these dictators in place. But hindsight is 20/20. And for you to say that it was a mistake at the time and you would have advocated a different decision at the time is a difference between you and Jeb Bush and Chris Christie, too, who came out today and at least said he believes George W. Bush made the best decision he could at the time. Do you disagree with that?
I think it's been a consistent mistake, and if we don't learn from history, we're making another error, and we'll continue to make errors. Yes, I think it was a mistake because I think Hussein was a counterbalance to Iran, and even at the time, even if he did have weapons, he had used weapons on his neighbors previously. He had used chemical weapons on his neighbors. So I don't think anybody thought Hussein was a great guy, but he was seen geopolitically as a counterbalance to another nation that is a threat to us in the region and potentially a threat to us here, Iran. And I think really, not just in hindsight, but in looking forward at the time, they should have realized that by toppling Hussein, they would have made Iran stronger and made Iran more of a threat.
But how can you say that? Because you were the one who was out there in 2007 saying you didn't perceive Iran as a threat. So how is George W. Bush back in 2003 supposed to say, let's not invade Iraq because Iran is too much of a threat and it'll eliminate the counterbalance?
Right. I think Iran is definitely more of a threat, so they have become more of a threat in the last 7 years. And I think I've never really indicated that they were of no threat, but I think that they were never a direct threat to us 7 or 8 years ago, whereas now I think they are a direct threat to our country.
But that begs the question about 2003, because you're saying George W. Bush should have foreseen that they were a threat back then. So they were a threat in 2003, but they weren't in 2007, and now they are again in 2015?
Well, I would say they were a threat to the instability of the region, and they were a threat to destabilize the region even back then, and have been for a long time. So I think there's a difference or a nuance between threat to destabilizing the region, threat to their neighbors, and a direct threat to us.
Let's get back to broader foreign policy, because when I had the following exchange with Jeb Bush, quite frankly, you were one of the first people I thought of in terms of the likely reaction. Let me play it for the audience.
Do you see the world as he does? Do you see that, the so-called Bush doctrine? Do you subscribe to it?
Our foreign policy ought to be grounded in not just the export of our own values or nation building. Those are good sentiments, but first and foremost in security and peace. And I think what we've seen under this president is, as we've pulled back, we're creating an incredibly insecure world.
Do you agree that nation building and exporting our values are good sentiments on foreign policy?
Well, the interesting thing is Jeb in these comments actually disagrees with his brother. When George W. ran in 2000, he actually said nation building was a mistake. And I think his views changed after 9/11. But I do think that there is a lot of evidence that we are not very good at creating nations, and that when we try to create nations by toppling governments, that really the opposite has happened.
How about the Patriot Act? Because there's you are reportedly getting ready, perhaps to engage in another long speech of sorts in the Senate. That's what I've heard on the Patriot Act and civil liberties and our protections. This has been an ongoing issue in the country, especially since Edward Snowden revealed what he revealed. And I know that you had defended him to some extent, and yet the director of national intelligence said that he endangered us, that he cost us greatly in national security, and so did his counterpart over at the DIA, said that he endangered American troops. So what is the point? What are you about to do, and how do you respond to those who say that your position endangers security?
I think the greatest thing that has endangered our security in the last couple of years was when the director of national intelligence lied to us, because you need to have trust in your intelligence officers. They have such great power. The intelligence community could do horrific things to invade our privacy, and I think most of the time they don't. But when they lie to us, we lose trust, and that actually makes intelligence gathering worse.
In your defense, he did. He did it right on camera. We played it many times, and he said, not wittingly, and he did it. But then he came out and said that Snowden caused massive historic security damage with what he revealed. So even though we might be ticked off at Snowden, we don't want massive security damage to the United States.
Right. What I would say is that I think you can catch terrorists using the Constitution, and that you don't have to give up on the Bill of Rights to catch terrorists. I think sometimes our blanket collection of all the records of all Americans has taken our eye off the prize. The Boston bombers, we were tipped off by the older brother. We investigated him, but we let our guard down, and we didn't know he flew back to Chechnya. We didn't know he'd been radicalized further, and we weren't spending enough time there. I would spend much more effort going after him. The guy in Phoenix, Simpson, we knew about him. We had arrested him previously. We had probable cause. If I were the judge in both of those cases, I would have said, yes, here's a warrant, search all their records, and then if you come back to me and you say they called 5 people that are suspicious, I'd have given you 5 more warrants. So I would go as deep as it takes with a warrant to get information. Instead of just scooping everything up, I would go as deep as it takes into the haystack, but I would call a judge first so we protect our civil liberties and protect the Bill of Rights.
That was the guy who went to Garland, Texas and tried to execute the people holding the free speech event. Where do you come out on that? Was it purely about free speech, or were those folks behaving provocatively and in any way inappropriately?
Well, the First Amendment's about protecting speech that we find unacceptable. It's easy to, if I say, oh, I love Megyn Kelly, she's a great journalist, that's easy to accept. But if I say something really terrible, that's harder to accept. And there are really despicable things that are actually said, and that's the harsh language you have to accept on the First Amendment. However, if I were their parent or their priest or their friend, I would advise you not to trash other people's religion, that doing it gratuitously isn't good for peace, it isn't good for things. But I would defend their right to say so if they want to say obnoxious things.
Senator Rand Paul never says obnoxious things, at least not here on the Kelly File. We're grateful for that. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Megan.